Yeah.
Well, welcome, Steve, to the podcast. So great to have you. Good to see you. Happy New Year, all of those wonderful things. You just told me you had a birthday, so happy birthday. But to get things kicked off here, for our listeners, many of them, you'll be new to them. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into why we're having this conversation, which I think is one of the more fascinating conversations I've had on this podcast, and maybe in my perspective, a conversation that isn't happening that needs to happen. So, but before we get there, why don't you share just a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Matt. So I am born and raised in Milwaukee. I'm a Jewish man. My Jewish transition went from kind of conservative, almost Orthodox, to now Reform. I've gone to a number of synagogues. That's a little bit about my spiritual history. Um, yeah, I went to school at UW Milwaukee, was a business manager, and worked 30 years at Rockwell Automation, which is those who've been around Milwaukee a long time, as Allen Bradley Clock Tower. Had a wonderful career there, and about two-thirds of the way through there, so I was there 20 years. Interesting story. I had an argument with my wife. I've been with my wife for 45 years now,
You had
and
an argument with your wife? Is
yes,
that
shocking.
unbelievable?
Yeah, shocking. I know. First one in 45 years too, which is
Right.
interesting. So no, so I happen to have that one for today. I mean, that day's argument was about so she worked in social services, and she would go in just the most uh desperate areas of the city to help out. And she came back one time and just said she was just so disappointed of how poor there were people in Milwaukee. And I happen to be, I don't know what it was. I'm a corporate American weenie. And I started somehow saying, I don't know why they can't just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make a go of it. And clearly the wrong thing to do at the time. But I was very adamant about everyone should be able to succeed. And she looked at me and said that she was taking through Verno, not El Verno, through Aurora. She was taking a class at the YWCA called Unlearning Racism. And she turned to me and she said, "You need that class more than I do." And she signed me up for it. And so next thing you know, I'm in this class with probably 15 other folks. And we're talking about the history of racism and biologics of race. And these are different classes. And I made a decision. If I'm going to go to this class, I'm going to go full board. I'm going to represent what a white male should talk about. And so I was not shy in sharing my opinions, which got me in trouble with the facilitators, but it definitely got the juices flowing. And there was a slide up on the screen that said, "We will never solve problems of inclusion without white men getting involved." And I looked around the room. I was the only white male there. I felt everyone was looking at me, and I'm like, "What are you looking at me for? I've never owned slaves. I'm a good guy. I really believe in social justice. What are you talking about?" And I got a little angry about it. Fast forward now, maybe uh, two classes, and we're on what's it like to be African American in the city. And there were example after example, two folks driving at the same time, one being pulled over because a black driver, two people shopping in a center, and the African American woman is being followed, the other one is not being followed. And you're just seeing this on screen, multiple examples of this. And then there was a young woman that was talking, and she looked into the camera. She said, "I look in the mirror every single day, and I know I have to live with this color. I have to live with this color, and I'll never be able to take it off." And man, I don't know what to tell you other than for a moment, for that moment, I stopped thinking about why I was that I was there and defending myself as a white male, and just started to think, wow, it must be difficult. You can't. I mean, I'm Jewish. I wear my mezuzah. I can put my mezuzah. You don't see it now. I can put that away. this person couldn't do that. And I started thinking about all the lessons I had in the class and um, and how many times that I interrupted with, now looking back, very minor issues. And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. And I started to cry, white fragility, started to cry, and I apologized to the group. And a gentleman came to me and he said, thanks for doing that. I don't think you have to, because in my experience, you're the only person that actually said what was on your mind. They didn't like play the game. They didn't just say what we want to hear. I knew where you're coming from, just like I know where you're coming from now in your awakening. And from that moment forward, I knew institutionalized racism was real. I knew there was a circle of poverty. And I knew as a white man, I was a key stakeholder of fixing this. And had one more class. I left that class recognizing that I had to do something. And from that point forward, and I will talk a little bit what I did with that knowledge, but it's safe to say that I applied it both in my personal and business life afterwards.
Well,
That's me.
yes, that's the second time I've heard that story, and I felt like it was the first time because I still felt like I was leaning in. I couldn't wait to hear where it went. And I think it represents what so many of us want in the society. I know even within our organization, we spend a lot of time having conversations of how do we stop preaching to the choir? How do we get people in the room who need to be in the room, who maybe think differently? How do we create then a safe space for them to say what they need to say or say what they want to say? And then how do we create opportunity for dialogue that could potentially change someone's perspective? And it's so rare to have a scenario like what you described. And I think part of what we're going to talk about today is maybe how we can create more spaces for similar situations to happen. So you have this awakening, and it should be noted, Steve, that your awakening and the reason that I'm in my current position right now, both because of our wives. So let's just put that out there. All
Yeah,
good
I know.
things,
That's true.
all good things are a response to great
True.
wives.
True.
So we'll just put that out there. But let's just move this forward then. So you have this awakening. You're in corporate America. A lot of times we all, if we look back at our lives, we all have these moments of awakening, right? These moments, especially those of us who do justice work. There's something, it's not easy work. So there's something that just grabs your heart and causes you to do whatever it is that you do. But when you have that awakening, a lot of times the biggest question on the table is, oh, what am I going to do with this? We even see that in response to, things happening in our world, everything that's happening in Minneapolis right now. I'm getting a lot of questions about, okay, what can we do about this? So in your scenario, what did you do when you had that experience?
Yeah. Before I do that, I'll say that even after all the awakening, things are going on in Minneapolis and things are going around the world. It's still a struggle as to where how do I focus my attention on the
Hmm.
right things. So even, and you'll share my experiences with you, but it's always difficult. I don't care where you've been through. It's tough.
Hmm.
So I came back to Rockwell and fully inspired that not only was this work of inclusion and diversity, which is really the mix in the room, was important thing to do. It was also, quite frankly, a business imperative. The company would do better by embracing diversity, and that started getting me involved. And in my role as a manager, as a role as an executive at Rockwell, my job is to attract and retain all my employees. And if I'm creating an environment that's not conducive for all my employees, I'm going to lose them. I'm going to lose them. And Rockwell had gone through pretty much a pretty big analysis maybe a year before I took this class. And they had committed themselves to learn more. They weren't exactly sure what they were doing, but they wanted to learn more. So I put together a presentation. There was a group called Global Voices, which is really Rockwell, 22,000 employees. It was their employee feedback mechanism. And they had a Global Voices Council. And I got on the agenda and I brought the professor from the YWCA with me and I presented the class and I presented my transformative experience. and said, I'm here. How can I help? And the other thing that came with that is they were like, great, let me see what we can do. Now, I was nervous. I'd not been involved in inclusion work at my company. So one of the guiding principles for me was I would always say yes to anything that someone asked me. I mean, I would be nervous every single time, but I just said, I'm going to
That is
say yes.
that's
Okay.
dangerous. That is
It's
a
ridiculously dangerous. But I also knew, so someone said, hey, we're having a panel. We need a white male on the panel. Will you do it? Yes. And then I would panic, when I get out of the room, like, what am I supposed to do? So next thing you know, I'm the token white male in a bunch of conversations. And one thing led to another. And I'm doing workshops, I'm doing conference calls with executives. And here's the first lesson that I learned is there are a lot of people that have done tremendous work on documenting books written on inclusion, diversity, inner workings within a corporation, how you intertwine those. My experience was one, a personal journey, and two, how do I incorporate that in every single business day?
Hmm.
And people wanted to hear that. That's what they wanted to hear. They didn't want to hear the theory. They want to hear how do you handle when you go to a factory when there's 300 people there and you're trying to talk to them, actually specifically talking to other white men about your journey and what they need to do. How are you going to do that? And I think it comes with an incredible amount of humility. You have to recognize you don't know spit. You know what you know, and you recognize and you communicate. So when someone says, well, I think you're full of bunk, I could say, yeah, me too. I thought I was too. I was exactly where you were. And that's okay. That's okay to be where you are because you grew up your whole life thinking this certain way. So I grew an expertise. If anything, I have an expertise in is talking to other men about it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to talk about it. And I also found that there was an incredible amount of dialogue that men wanted to have, but they were taught not to have it.
Hmm.
Don't show your feelings. Don't talk about what you don't have. Just get the job done. And oh, by the way, if you don't do it, I'm going to kick your butt. I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to scream at you. So I found that this work, which was really designed to promote and create an environment conducive for women and underrepresented minorities, helped men just as much, if not more, embracing this work. Because the intersectionality of this work is powerful. So I'm a white male. So I always like this example. You put 30 white males in a room. I promise you no two are the same. One came from the military. One probably statistically is LGBTQ. One is an introvert. One is an extrovert. One came from another part of the country. One doesn't speak English well. One of them has height, weight, other challenges. You want to celebrate that difference. You want to be able to bring that difference to work because it makes you special. Most of the time, men are taught not to do that. Line up in a row, say what you're supposed to say, and get out of there. And then meanwhile, they're the least productive people in the company because they're not spending time being free to express who they are. I go on a tangent. Sorry, I just go
Yeah,
on.
that statement right there is enough to just spend some time contemplating and thinking. And I do think there's so much space in this world for, I mean, we've made some progress, but there is space in this world to celebrate our uniqueness. And if we can find more of those spaces, I think we're going to be a more productive society. And if we stop expecting everybody to do the same thing, and again, we're seeing a generation, not necessarily my generation, but I'm thinking about my kids' generation. They're in their early 20s, and I'm starting to see a little bit of more of that, maybe a little glimmer of hope there. All right, let's jump into let's just speak it out loud. I spend my 70% of my work time, probably 60-70% of my work time is like this. I'm on a Zoom call, I'm talking to somebody about something. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'm doing a podcast, sometimes we're talking about how to protect our immigrant brothers and sisters, sometimes we're talking about get out the vote work. But most of my work happens like this. We also do a lot of work where we do webinars. So we'll do, it could be, we've got a Supreme Court election coming up here in Wisconsin. And so
Yeah.
yesterday I was talking with our statewide organizer, Rhonda, about, okay, what kind of webinars can we do to help people get ready? When we do those webinars and when I'm in a meeting, especially if it's a meeting with a big group of people, and I don't think I'm exaggerating here, Steve.
Okay.
I
Okay.
am usually outnumbered gender wise at least 3-1. I
Okay.
bet 75% female, 25. And I think that's probably very, very conservative.
Yeah.
I have this huge passion for this work. It's in my personal life, it's in my professional life, it's what I talk about a lot. It just matters a lot to me. And what I'm discovering is I'm a little bit unique as like yourself as a white male in this world being in this work.
Yeah.
Another note, and this is just practical, right? Another note is many of those people that end up on the Zoom calls end up being, a little bit older demographically. A lot of retired people are on those calls. So the question I'm always, as an executive director, a question that I've always got ringing in my head is how do I get more people that look like me
Yeah.
on these calls? And even if they don't look like me, how do we get more people? I'm going to be 50 this year. How do we get more retired men in this space? Because I think a lot of what we see is a lot of retired women or women who are a little bit older are using their time in this justice space or the civic engagement space. Men apparently not so much. And I just sat down, and this was not on a Zoom call. I got invited out to dinner with a group of people. And what happened, and it was the first time I was meeting many of them. I knew one person who invited me to this, and my wife and I went, and the women sat on one side of the table. The men sat on the other side of the table. In hearing what my wife said the women talked about, it sounded a lot more meaningful than what the men talked about. I think the men talked about, I remember one guy talking about his garage. I think another guy was asking me if I ride snowmobiles, just things that in my mind couldn't matter any less. So I think we have this really interesting cultural thing going on here. And so, I mean, maybe this is too big of a fish to fry, but how do we start this work of
Okay.
helping men understand that they also can engage in this work that you and I are doing right now?
Yeah. So great question. I'm somewhat prepared for that answer because I had, 15 years of trying to engage men in this work. And so let me give you just a couple like key directives in this. Uh, One is we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional. We want more men in this work. Let's say it out loud. We want more men in this work. So then the question is, what is it? What do we need to do to get more men in this work? And so one of the things that we did at Rockwell is we worked with this firm, great firm, and we had these 4-day workshops. Okay. And so imagine taking a salesperson out of the job for 4 days. Okay. And it was called um, White Men's Caucus. That's the name of the class, White Men's Caucus. And the name of the company was White Men as Full Diversity Partners. So imagine you're working, you've been a salesman, you're talking about snow blowers, and you get an invitation that says you need to be there for 4 days on a White Men's Caucus. So the first thing you're going to think is, I must have done something wrong. I must have done something wrong.
Right.
Did I say something to someone? Did I do something wrong? And so I'm in the penalty box somehow. And throughout those 4 days, um, the organization, and I've taught these as well for another organization, you have to kind of break down those discussions. You have to break them down, and you say things like, so we have something called one exercise, and I've done this virtually and I've done this in person. It's called a walk across the room exercise. You ever heard about walk across the room exercise?
Possibly. I'm going to wait till you describe it to me before I show my
So this is
cards.
a very quiet, solemn, thought-provoking exercise. So you imagine you have the first one I went to was amazing. This was a combined session, men and women. There were like 80 people in the room, and the facilitator asked everyone to stand on one side of the room. Okay, and they said, "I'm going to say a statement, and if that statement is true for you, I want you to walk across the room." Okay, quietly. And then turn around, look at everyone, and walk back. And then they proceeded to ask questions. You are a woman, okay? Women walk across the room. They turn around. You are the first of your family to get a degree. Walk across the room, back and forth. You or someone you know is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Oh. Oh. People stop. And they start to walk across the room. Turn around. Not everyone. Quiet. Thought-provoking. You're divorced. I don't know, whatever it is. Walk across the room. You have been whistled at, sexually harassed by a man. Every woman walks across the room. Every woman. So you have 70 people there. You have 30 of them, 35 are men, watching every one of their colleagues walk across the room to say, I have been sexually harassed at work. That's impossible. That's impossible. I'm sorry, that's just not true. Come back. Talk about getting men's attention. This isn't some future type of thing. This is now. I remember coming home and asked my wife, I said, you weren't harassed at work, were you? Of course. Well, how come you didn't say anything to me? Well, what are you going to do? Okay. So to recognize that there's a problem. Now, imagine doing that with only men. Only men. You have family members that have been in jail. You have been ridiculed. You've laughed at gay jokes. You felt the only in a room. Okay? You're going through this exercise. You are intentionally putting yourself out in an uncomfortable space. Okay? This is a safe environment for you to do that. Right? We've already done some things beforehand. We introduced each other. We did some things. After that session, okay, lasts about 20 minutes, we break into groups and we say, what did you hear? What did you hear? One time I asked the question, have you ever been sexually harassed by a man? A man walked across the room, started to walk across the room, didn't turn around, walked right back. And during the break, I asked, wow, may I ask you a question? What was it? And he said, yeah, my feet started moving before I even thought about it. And I was so embarrassed, I couldn't turn around. Now talk about a place where a man can admit that happened to them. Okay? You're breaking barriers down. You are forming. This is where I think inclusion comes from. It comes from the heart. It's the head and the heart. Inclusion is head and the heart. You can't do one without the other. You got to understand why it's good for business, and you have to do it because it comes from here. And every person, I'm looking at my heart, you can't see me. Every person has their own reason. My personal reason is I have a daughter. My personal reason is I have a gay cousin who I love. My personal reason I now find, I didn't never even embrace this before, I'm Jewish. I used to forget the fact I'm Jewish when I did these things. I'm like, God, that's just that. But I was doing my participants injustice not to say, this has affected me. It has affected me. Okay? That's my personal, everyone's got a personal reason. You tap into that and you tap into that feeling. How do I get there? How do I get involved? Okay, that's the second thing. You have to create a safe environment for men to talk. Okay? The third thing that I think is so be intentional, create a safe environment. The third thing is Men, when they're involved in this work, are going to react one of a few ways. And acceptance usually isn't the first one. The first one is guilt or defensiveness. Okay? Guilt or defensiveness. You know, I feel terrible. I started crying during that session. That isn't guilt. That's guilt. Now, by the way, guilt and defensiveness are not good. They're not good. They're not helpful. They're important. We recognize they're part of the dynamic. The important part is to get past that and say, listen, you've spent your whole life as a man in an environment where everything you saw on TV, all your leaders, all your heroes never talked about their feelings. Never. You are taught not to do that. Now I'm asking you to do that. You kind of want to, but you have things in you pulling you away from trying to embrace that. That's hard work. That's hard work. You're going to feel a little defensive. You're going to feel guilty. Don't. I felt guilty. I went through the same thing you did. I was defensive for 4 sessions. And then I finally I felt guilty. Well, crying and feeling guilty, did that help me? No. Recognize I'm on a journey and I made this work. That's success. So when you communicate with men, you have to recognize this is hard work. And it's even, I'll say this now, I waited this long to actually bring this up. It's ridiculously hard given the political environment we're in now and the de-emphasizing of diversity and inclusion, right? I've talked to some of my CEO friends that I used to work with in getting this job done. And I asked them, how do you manage that? And their point is to be very simple. The problem hasn't gone away. I just have to rename it. I can't name it privilege anymore. I can't blame white people. I'll just say the message without blaming white people. I never wanted to blame white people. Never wanted to. Never did. But when you say some things that make white people feel bad, feel guilty, you have to manage that a little harder. So getting men together now is a little more difficult. It's more difficult. The need is still there. Men carry a lot of weight. If you're 75% women or 60-some% women, you're taking a gigantic voting component, a gigantic influence component off the table. So those are 3 things I'd say I would start with.
All right, so let's go over those 3 things again. Number 1,
be intentional.
Number 2,
but we want men, when men be involved. Okay. 2,
creating a safe space, right?
Yes, create a safe space that you can have a conversation, and that can be done. I've done it 100 times. You got to be intentional, and you got to create a safe space. And then 2, stop blaming men. Don't even think about blaming men. Be there, meet them where they're at. Recognize how difficult it is. Those are things I think that I learned.
That's wonderful. And, that's just great advice because there's some practical steps. You did it in a certain way. You did it in corporate America and companies, things like that. But you could take those 3 things and also consider that within a congregational setting, within a lot of different settings.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think the creativity that needs to be done is not that we send Steve everywhere to work with people for 4 days, but that people hear the work that you've done and then are able to apply some of it at least to their own scenario. What do we say now? Because that's one level, is maybe as a leader or somebody who has a sense of influence, maybe they can work to create those spaces for, men in their circle of influence. But what would you say, to the person out here that's that's listening to this and they're feeling like it's time for them. This is a man out there who's seen what's happening in the world, wanting to get involved because of the way he grew up. He's got a million, hesitancies, to doing that. What would we say to that individual to just say, okay, how do I'm not going to wait around for somebody to hold a class for me. I just got to get out there and do it. How could we encourage that man to do that?
That's a great question. And my answer would be, don't try to boil the ocean. Do a step. Have a conversation with your wife. Have a conversation with your friend. Hey, I just had this thought. about getting involved in this. And I'm a little nervous about it. I'd like to, what do you think? Right? I think the idea is it's 1,000 little steps. And you're right. If we started this work with some massive training, I think we'd lose them.
Hmm.
After you do any kind of training, my work is just take a step, and just by even admitting that I want to do something is a step. Even saying to yourself, wow, I see this and I feel like I need to get involved. First of all, congratulate yourself on a step.
Hmm.
That's the first thing I'd ask them to do. Congratulate yourself. You took a big step. Now, don't try to beat the world. I mean, what I struggle with now is, and I talked to Rhonda about this, is how I got with you. I was at a point where I have all this energy and I don't know where to put it. There's so many things going on that I ended up, apathy just caught me. It caught me. And I didn't do anything. And then Rhonda said, wow, Matt may want you on a podcast. Wow, that's a yes. That's a something, right? That's what this is about.
So you're living it, like what we're doing right now is a living example of what we're encouraging others to do. Because we don't, our conversation, you and I, Steve, it's got a long ways to go, and I'm excited to see what may become of this long term. But right now, this is kind of step two for us, maybe, of just
Yeah,
let's keep
yeah,
this conversation going and see what happens with it. I was really struck when you talked about, and again, I joked about our wives earlier and their importance in our lives, but it's completely true as well. And one of the things I think we can do as well is just make sure that we have a safe, open space in our households. I know my wife and I have worked for now 27, almost 28 years to do that. And I know that in the world in general, I don't always feel safe or comfortable to share my emotions. I'm also an introverted person who grew up in an environment where I wouldn't say it wasn't safe, but I would say it wasn't ever experienced. So I just grew up in a household that didn't show a lot of emotion, if you
right.
will, which is very common for those of us who grew up in the Midwest. And so what I know is that and again, this work is hard. This world right now is really hard. The news is hard. And one of the greatest steps that I take on a regular basis is when I'm really struggling in my mind or in my heart. The most important first step for me to do is always to allow myself to be emotional with my spouse so that
Yes.
she can just listen. She can maybe give advice towards a step in that direction. And so I think, for those who are listening who are married, that can be a great space. And I'm talking to the men and women who are listening to this
Mhm.
because, as a wife, you can hear Steve and I sharing openly and honest the importance that you hold in our lives as our wives, because you give us that space, hopefully, to be emotional. You want that. Usually women want that out of their husbands, right? And also, I know my wife is often that person who has a great amount of perspective of okay, you're feeling that. Here's where you are in life. Here's what I'm thinking. And she doesn't tell me what to do, but she tells me maybe a little bit how to think, which is really, really wonderful. So I do think, step one for all of us is just to make sure that we have great personal relationships. Say you're not married, no worries. Do you have some trusted friends that
Yes.
you have around you that you can count on? Maybe you're a younger person. Do you have a parent that you really trust to do some of this work with? Because I think a lot of this work for us to feel safe as men has to happen within a context that we feel very safe in already. And I know for me,
Totally.
that's always been with my wife, and I've tried really hard to create that environment for my kids as well. And so don't miss that opportunity that you probably have right in front of you with a spouse or a friend or a loved one as well. Well, Steve, we're going to continue this conversation because I have about a million questions in my mind, but I'll be interested to see just some of the feedback maybe that we get about this conversation. And I know that it's one of my goals. I've got a ways to go before I'm at retirement age, and I want to spend a lot more time doing the work that I'm currently doing. And I would love that when I get towards the closer years to retirement, where I see a different demographic showing up in some of these spaces that we're talking about today. So we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for your time. Just means the world to me.
This was wonderful, Matt. You are so good at this, by the way. Very relaxed. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much, Steve. Well, we'll be in touch, and thank you again for your time. I really appreciate you.
All right. Bye now.